Well, we want to welcome you to the first of this year's Lunchtime Lectures. It's good to see all of you here and glad that you remembered that they began today. I confess I almost forgot myself, but luckily found out in time. Our topic today is Moravians in Germany. And of course, our German Moravians are part of what is officially known as the European Continental Province. It's not the German province, it's the European Continental Province. And we have congregations not only in Germany, but also in the Netherlands and Denmark and in Switzerland, and now in Estonia. You may remember that before World War II, we had a work there in those countries, particularly Estonia, and which we assumed with the Russian occupation had withered away and were no longer in existence. But after the Berlin Wall came down, I understand that the telephone rang in headquarters in Herrnhut, and basically they said, "Hi, we're the Estonian Moravians, send Leffiesbuns." And so they are now becoming an integral part of the European Continental Province. However, today we're going to concentrate mostly on the specifically German part. And our church there, unlike here, there is the state church of whatever area you're in. So Moravians are not exactly dissenters. We're sort of respectable, but there is the state church to which people have to pay taxes like public schools here. You pay the tax whether you go or not. We, of course, anymore don't benefit from that, but it makes for a little different way of seeing. If you wonder how many Moravians there are in Germany, there's about the same number as here in North Carolina. They have fewer congregations than we do, but their congregations tend to be a little bit larger than ours. And they are of several types. Some are settlement congregations, much like here in Salem, where there was the Moravian town as well as the church, and church and town were together. And you will find, of course, brother's house, sister's house, the things that we're used to here. Others are in urban situations, for instance, in Hamburg or in Berlin. And in Hamburg, there isn't exactly a church. You sort of have a place you can worship in the minister's apartment, but quite different from the rural setting of Herrnhut. And some don't have a church at all. There's the Rhineland congregation, which has no regular place to meet. They are scattered all over a wide area, and the minister there spends most of his or her time in the automobile, going from place to place, and they get together in smaller groups as they can. So you can see that there is quite a bit of variation in just the congregations themselves. And then there are some, like Gnadau, which was a Moravian settlement community, but was in the eastern part. It's not too far from Herrnhut. It's a walk from Herrnhut. It's a long walk, I can tell you. When I was there with some college students, we referred to the walk as Death March 1. But it was a little Moravian town. You have the church and there's some schools, but it had seen little in the way of improvements. When I was there, and this is now more than 20 years ago, the streets were not paved, and they did have indoor plumbing. Lighting was a minimal, but it was almost like living, 50 or 60 years ago in a small community here. And I did meet an older gentleman there. Actually, he was a few years younger than I am now, but at the time he seemed elderly, telling about his experiences at the end of World War II when he was, a teenager. And it's the very end when they were calling up all of the people they could to defend the Reich. And so he said he and some of his friends were scooped up by Nazi officers, given a cap or a coat or whatever uniform they had left. And he stood there and said, and they took us to the top of that hill right up there. And they told us that that is the route the American tanks would be coming down, coming from Schönebeck on to the next main town, and our job was to stop them. And we had a couple of artillery pieces, and they said the officers showed us basically how to load them and fire them, and pointed them more or less in the right direction. And they said, now, you boys, keep your eye on the road, and as soon as you see the tanks come into sight, then you begin firing at them. And so he said, we stood there and we looked, and sure enough, here come the American tanks coming down, and we looked around for the officers for orders to fire. And the officers had disappeared. They were gone. And I said, well, what did you do? He said, we came down off of that hill, threw away our caps, and stood there in the square with the rest of the town to wave at the American tanks. So, but it's sort of interesting to think of warfare being that close to your peaceful little knot-out. And as I've already intimated, after World War II, the German province, or the part of the unity, was split into two districts, just as West Germany and East Germany were. However, as Germany is reunited, the two districts in Germany are now reunited. And the East, which was in the communist area, was very, very poor. In the West, they were much more prosperous, and that, of course, caused a little bit of problems in getting back together, but they seem to be working things like that out. Now, Moravians in Germany is something that means a lot to us because, of course, that's where our renewed Moravian unity began. This is where Herrnhut is, where the exiles started the first community that grew into the modern Moravian church, and spread to Herrenhag, which got closed down, and a lot of them got shipped to America, so some of us probably have some Herrenhag relatives along the way. Other beautiful places, like in the Black Forest, there's Königsfeld, which is very much a Moravian town, with large schools there. That's what it's most known for. It also has a wonderful bakery, and I got put up above the bakery, so waking up early in the morning with all of the smells coming up I remember that much more than I remember anything about the sermons there. And Niesky and Kleinbelke, other towns, but this is not a history lesson. I want to talk today mostly about what is life like in a Moravian congregation. What things are the same, what things are different, what would be recognized, what would we be a little bit surprised at. And the first thing, of course, as Margaret Brady, who just recently returned from there, noted, is that in Germany we are not Moravians. That term is used in English-speaking countries, was a nickname given purely because they said, who are those people? And the first exiles happened to come from Moravia, so, they're the Moravians. But as a name for the church, it is not really used there. Instead, they are called the Herrnhuter, from Herrnhut, Brudergemein. And that Brethren's Gemein doesn't translate, but Brethren's unity is the way we usually say it. But of course, in Germany, like in America, a lot of people don't know what a Moravian is. In Germany, a lot don't either. And in fact, in one of our industries that the church carried on for a long time, they made small cigars. And those were known as Herrnhuters. So if you say you're a Herrnhuter, they sort of think you're a small cigar, a lot of them. Much like John F. Kennedy's famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech, and of course a Berliner is a cream-filled donut. It is accurate for a person from Berlin, but usually it's a cream. So they wondered why this American leader is saying he's a cream-filled donut. Anyway, as you look around at our churches and communities there, you will find that they don't necessarily look like ours. You have a brother's house, you have a sister's house, the church, and all of that. But they are usually of stone or stucco, just as in Pennsylvania. the buildings there in Bethlehem don't look like the buildings here. And we who grew up here tend to think that every Moravian church ought to be made out of brick and have a hood over the door and all of that, but not so. We only use brick here because we didn't have any decent stone to build from. They hadn't found Mount Airy yet, and if they had, it would have been too much trouble to haul it. So we used what we had, and of course North Carolina has a superabundance of clay, so that's why our buildings are of brick. Inside, the churches are somewhat different from most of ours, though we have some carryovers. Zinzendorf referred to the churches as the living room of the congregation, and they tend to be very plain, white, with wooden benches facing the long wall, just as home church does. Most churches, you have the long nave and there's the altar area or pulpit area, but ours tend to be face the side, which makes it feel more intimate. You're closer together, more like a family gathered around. So that's one difference you would notice. In the German churches, there is not an altar. Well, shouldn't be in ours either, but sometimes we have a table that looks suspiciously like one, though it's very pretty. But there is no pulpit as such. They have what is called a liturgist table, and it is a table behind which the minister sits for the services. It has a reading desk on top. The service and sermon and all are given from that. It's low down, close to the people. For communion, they simply take off the reading desk and change the cloth on the table, which for normal occasions is green. And for communion, they put on a red cloth, usually with a smaller white cloth over it. And of course, originally, home church didn't have a pulpit either. That was added in, 1820s or so by Bishop Van Vleck, who wanted to be modern and au courant and thought we needed a pulpit. And so he put one on the wall very high up. And this is not about Moravians in Germany, but you might as well hear it anyway, which suited the people in the balcony because they could see him fine. But the people on the lower level complained that they got a crick in the neck having to look up while he was preaching. So they reached a compromise, lowered the pulpit by several steps. And Frank Albright, in his History of Home Church, says, and thus both the pulpit and Bishop Van Vleck were taken down a notch. But anyway, so liturgist table. If you've been out to the old church at Bethabara, of course, you're familiar with that arrangement, or in the chapel in the Zal in the brother's house. And the choir in most of our German churches is in the balcony on the side. And that, I think, is a good arrangement. Zinzendorf encouraged that because he said the choir represents the heavenly chorus of angels. And it was a way of symbolizing that we are part of the greater church triumphant. And of course, all of our choirs always behave like angels, so it was obvious. That's a good arrangement, because if you have the choir up front behind the pulpit and all that, you tend to be watching what the choir is doing instead of necessarily paying attention. Some, like Messiah or, Christ Church, have the choir in the back, which is fine. You don't get distracted, but every time they're singing, particularly if there's a solo or something, you want to turn around and have a look. So having it off to the side doesn't make it the center, but you can still see them. So I sort of like that arrangement myself. Our sanctuaries there, as I said, are very plain, mostly plain white. And indeed, that got us into some trouble at the end of World War II, when, as you may recall, the Herrenhut Church was burned by the Russians. And one of the contributing factors, there's several versions of the story, but one of the contributing factors is that the Russians, who had little experience with religion, or if they did, it was with Eastern Orthodoxy, with the wonderful icons and the gold leaf and all of that. Well, when they entered this building, they didn't realize it was a church. It didn't look like a church to them. It looked like Nazi Party headquarters. So that's one story that's told of why they burned it. Finding a a barrel of rum in one of the cellars was probably another contributing factor. Anyway, the churches there do not have usually large Sunday school buildings or huge fellowship halls or family life centers, as we are now calling them. But like Moravians everywhere, after the service, you'll find they find places to get together and have something to nosh. And as I say, some things you would find very familiar, things we are used to. The Advent stars, the daily text, just like we are used to. Particularly in Germany, the local congregation have bands or brass choirs, as we do. And that all sometimes causes confusion with the surrounding. Another World War II story, they told me in Herrenhut that one of the sons of the congregation was off around Stalingrad or somewhere, and so his mom would always write him frequently to keep him up with what's going on back home, just as our own moms did here. They would say, you know, who's having a birthday in this? And one of the older members had a birthday, and he had played in the band for years. And it's the custom there on your birthday that the members of the church band go and serenade you first thing in the morning in honor of your birthday. However, in reporting this, she used the term Aufblasen, which literally means to blow up. And so the censor, in reading this, called the poor soldier in and said, "What kind of people are you blowing up this 70-some-year-old man?" So again, a little misunderstandings from time to time. At Christmas time, of course, I've already mentioned the Advent stars. You will find the candles given out to the people. However, in Germany, they no longer use the beeswax candles or the red ribbons. Of course, I was surprised when I went to Bethlehem and found out they didn't use red either. But you know, what's pink and green, and you know. But we kept the original down here, by the way. But in Germany specifically, it was during World War I that beeswax was hard to get, and also whatever is in red dye to make it red was also needed for munitions. And so they weren't going to divert it to making red dye. They used it for explosives. So you couldn't get red paper. So they had to use either green paper or white or gold. Of course, the war lasted 4 years, which meant that we had done it that way for 4 times. Being Moravians, it's now locked into tradition. So they still do it that way. You will find also that the ministers, as they do here, wear the white surplice for serving communion, baptisms, and that sort of thing, though the German surplice doesn't look much like ours. Again, we have preserved the original form of it, with all the pleats and the belt and all of this, which some people just love to have to iron. I'm looking at Barbara. But thank heavens they invented no iron fabric by the time I came along. But again, during World War I, cloth was in short supply, and so with the surplices they made during those years, they could not put all of the pleats in it. So they're very plain garments, look almost like a lab coat. But again, having done it for those years, they have continued it, and so you will find that the surplice has a little different form there. They have love feast, of course, as we do. And the buns you would find fairly familiar. However, you would more likely get tea rather than coffee. And oddly enough, and this struck me, we think of Herrenhut as the mother of all traditions and being very staid and formal, but there at least the Dieners will come back around again to see if anybody wants refills, which I thought was sort of a nice thing to do, you know.
Do they come back with cream and sugar too?
Yes, they have little pots you can, you know. As here, of course, there are certain families that have been around forever. the Reichels particularly. I think there's been a Bishop Reichel in every generation since Zinzendorf's time. So, you know, a lot of that Holy Week readings we would find familiar. Now, some things are a little different. Let's take a normal Sunday morning service. You would find that they have liturgies, as we do, and particularly the church litany would be very recognizable to us. They do have some seasonal liturgies, as we do for Advent or Lent, but not generally in the hymnal. There are leaflets passed out. They have not caught on to be sort of standard there. And at least in the more older settlement congregations, Sunday starts on Saturday evening with the Singstunde. On Saturday evening you gather for the singing service, which, as you know, is a series of hymn stanzas selected to develop a theme. No sermon is needed, and they have a very good idea. Instead of having to list all of the multitudinous hymn stanzas up on a board or call them out, they type them up on the side of a piece of paper, which is just wide enough to stick in your hymnal, so that this sticks out and you can easily follow down and find what hymn stanza comes next. That might come in handy here sometimes. On Sunday morning, as I say, you have your liturgy. You'd have the reading of Scripture, as we would be familiar with. There would be prayer, you know, all the usual type things. The hymns you would find a little bit different. Many of our Moravian hymns that we know and think of course, are used, as well as a lot more Lutheran. But the harmonization of the hymns, they have gone with more what is German standard than Moravian standard. So some of them might sound a little different, but generally would be recognizable to us. If we went to a service of Holy Communion there, of course, the surplice would be a little different. They tend to have communion not on Sunday morning of major festivals, as we do, but more like a monthly or bi-weekly celebration, which very often is in the evening, not at the main Sunday service. And that actually comes from Zinzendorf's time. He said, what do we call it? He says, the Lord's Supper. So why aren't you having it at supper time? So, you know, but that would be a little different to us. The common cup is almost exclusively used there, where you have the chalice, not a big fancy gold one as you would find in a Catholic or Episcopal church, but usually crystal is often used. Often will have a handle so you can get a good hold on it, and the minister starts it, and then it is passed down from person to person in the pew, and each one takes a sip as they go. So of the wine, they don't take it all together as we do with the little shot glasses that Bishop Fole brought in. He'd be horrified if he knew I called them shot glasses. But, anyway, and then there are usually two ministers, and one will receive it at the end, almost like ushers taking up the offering, and have a cloth to wipe it off and then send it back down the other. The communion bread is a little bit different also. It's unleavened, but we now are used to the little round wafers. There used to be in the sticks that they broke off. There's the closest I can describe it, if you remember way back in grade school when you got your little cup of seal test ice cream or Farmer's Dairy ice cream, you got a little wooden spoon with it to eat it with, and it had sort of a bulge on each end and slender in the middle. Well, that's sort of what German communion bread looks like, and they will break it and give one to each person, one half to each person. At least that's what it was where I was. No doubt there are some variations as here. But again, there's only one right hand of fellowship. We couldn't quite decide which was the proper place to put it, and found a good reason for doing it twice, which works very nicely. But in Germany, there's generally only the one. But as I said, a lot would be very familiar. For instance, the Lord's Prayer, though of course it's going to be in German, not in English. When I made a similar talk down at Hopewell not long ago, they wanted to hear the Lord's Prayer in German, so I read it to them, and I figure you might as well get the same. So if we are in Germany, our Lord's Prayer would go, Vater unser, der du bist im Himmel, geheiliget werde dein Name, dein Reich komme, dein Wille geschehe wie im Himmel, also auch auf Erden. Unser täglich Brot gib uns heute und vergib uns unsere Schuld, wie wir vergeben unseren Schuldigern. Und führe uns nicht in Versuchen, sondern erlöse uns von dem Bösen. Denn dein ist das Reich und die Kraft und die Herrlichkeit in Ewigkeit. Amen. I like the way that last rolls, you know. Dein ist das Reich und die Kraft und die Herrlichkeit in Ewigkeit. I thought also I might take opportunity to read Jesus Makes My Heart Rejoice to you in German in the original, though, you know, that for us is quintessential Moravian, and it is there, but they think of it as a children's hymn. It's seldom used by the adults, and they wonder why we want to sing. It's sort of like us, you know, getting together and singing Jesus Loves Me, you know, in church, which, okay, happens occasionally, but, you know, is a little different. So, by the way, this is the new German hymnal, only came out a year or so ago, and it has the, if you can see it, has the star on the front, and Gesangbuch der Evangelischen Brüdergemeine, and as our book of worship did, they also incorporated some of the familiar hymns translated into several languages, and that's how I made it into the German hymnal. Roy Ledbetter and I had done a translation of Sonne der Gerechtigkeit, Son of Righteousness Arise, which is very popular there, so that's one they added several languages, and they used our version. So I was pleased in thumbing through it to find myself in the index of the German hymnal. You never know where you're going to turn up. But Jesus Makes My Heart Rejoice in German. Weil ich Jesu Schäflein bin, freu ich mich nur immerhin über meinen guten Hirten, der mich wohl weiß zu bewirten, der mich liebet, der mich kennt und bei meinem Namen nennt. And if you get the cadence of it, you sort of see where we got ours. And then, of course, the Moravian blessing, you know, Komm, Herr Jesu, sei unser Gast und segne, was du bescheret hast. One verse only. But anyway, so, well, that's just a brief look at the at our German Moravians. Similarly as here, our church there is very small, but it shares in our mission heritage. Its influence is actually much wider than the numbers might indicate. They go through some of the same tensions that we do. The question of to modernize or not modernize. They had quite a discussion over whether to put the new ecumenical version of the Lord's Prayer in the new hymnal or not. They did. I read you the old one. They also are concerned about the young people coming along and how can we involve them more actively in the church. Much of that would sound very familiar, though some things would not. For instance, in Königsfeld, the Board of Elders decided that for refreshments for the Senior High Youth Fellowship, the church would provide 2 bottles of beer per person. I doubt we have that done here. Any more than Home Church took my suggestion for the 200th anniversary that they recreate the opening love feast for Home Church and serve beer and buns. I thought it would have been perfectly historic, but somehow they didn't go along with that. Also, our German Moravians, as here, are very cooperative with other denominations, particularly with the Lutheran State Church. In fact, Königsfeld is a joint Lutheran Moravian congregation, served usually by Moravian ministers. And one week they do the Lutheran service first and then the Moravian. The next week they do vice versa. So if you're going out to take part in the service, you have to look at the calendar to make sure which book to print up or whether to put on the black robe or a white surplice or whatever. But they're very much involved in that. And as we are with our full communion with the Lutherans and Episcopalians and Presbyterians. So again, you would find a lot that feels familiar, a lot that feels a little different. But I recall going into Herrnhut for the first time and just sort of looking around and said, yep, home. And I think that kind of spirit pervades Moravians wherever we find them, whatever they are called. So thanks for your attendance this time, and we hope that you'll be able to make it back next time. Is there a listing there of what comes up next, Richard?
No, this is last year's.
Well, it is the archives. You can't expect us to be up to date with everything, but, oh. Let's see. Lunchtime. NOLA will be doing it on the new Moravian songbook that has come out, which has some very, very good things in it, I might add. So I'm sure you'll enjoy it.
Is it still so heavy?
No, this is not a new official hymnal. It's a supplement, hymns written by living Moravians, and new ones that have not been previously published before.
You mean old ones were written by dead Moravians?
Well, we print them by dead Moravians. That's sort of like the tourist who asked me, are all Moravians buried in the graveyard? I said, well, just the dead ones. But that will be good. You'll get to hear a bit about it and probably a chance to sing some of them too. And I can vouch that there's some really good things in it. So thanks for being here today, and we hope we'll see you next time as well.
Could you tell them about the daily textbook in Germany, how it's used and how many?
Oh, okay.
I think that's
It is the most popular devotional in Germany daily. It's sort of like the upper room was here. That's the way it is in Germany. People who have nothing else to do with the Moravian Church have the daily textbook. And they use it to open meetings and daily readings at home, family devotions, much like we do. But it's certainly much more influential there than here. And I forgot to mention in Herrnhut, was where they do choose the text 3 years ahead for what the text will be. They have them all in a bowl and draw them out, and then they put New Testament texts to go with them, send them out, and each province adds their own hymns or prayers and things. Actually, the bowl they keep all of the texts in to draw from is Zinzendorf's punch bowl, which I was there in the headquarters, and they said, here, hold it. And it's crystal. It's not metal. It's crystal. And I'm standing there thinking 250 some years, and I'm going to drop this thing. Luckily, I passed it back off before we did. But thank you, John, for bringing that in. Yes, Chris?
You mentioned that they have to pay the government church tax or something.
Mm-hmm.
Does that, some of that come back to our missions, and
there is an agreement with the church, state church for some of that, I believe. That it's not all gone, but yeah, there is some agreement for that. But the fact that most churches in Germany then don't have collections, and so ours don't either. You go in and pay your dues in the office. Though I understand that of late there has been some discussion that they thought they might get a little more if they did pass the plate like Americans. So
pastor salaries are paid by government taxes on them.
They were in the communist era, and I'm not sure that that's so in the West. Graham, do you know on that? I think there, but I know particularly in Czechoslovakia and East Germany that it's odd that the communist government is paying the Christian ministers, but of course if it's going to exist, they wanted to control it. And church salaries then were officially classed as the lowest possible. Sanitation workers made more than ministers, unlike the United States. Yeah, Chris, and then I'll get you. Yes, sir.
We spoke of the European senator
Mm-hmm.
Is there any agreement, for instance, are the Dutch represented in leadership and the Danes and the Swiss?
They do make an attempt to be inclusive in that as well, yeah. And of course, having such different situations, they have to be very intentional about that.
You didn't mention Albania, the newest part.
Yeah, that I'm not as familiar with, but I will find out. But, yeah,
Talk to Patty.
yeah,
She's been
that,
there.
yeah. Yeah, in fact, they came by the archives. The Albanian Moravians wanted copies of several of my books because they said they have little or nothing Moravian. And the Germans had sent them something, but none of them speak German, but several of them read English. So my books are on the way to Albania. So, yes.
I was just going to ask you, what other provinces don't use the word Moravian?
Well, officially Tanzania would not, though, but most of the others do have it in there somewhere. It's just the European continent.
And also part of the Czech Republic is.
Well, yeah, they wouldn't use
Yeah,
Moravian.
but they're part of the European.
Well, no, the Czech province is independent. It's a separate province.
I thought some were Czech and some, and there was a group of Czechoslovakians who were.
Yeah,
part of
the unity
European.
work that are now under supervision of the
Yeah.
continental province. You're quite right. So, okay?
Sort of means.
Right, yeah. That would be another that wouldn't. Anywhere that is German or Dutch language would not.
Thank you.
Okay? All right, thank you very much. See you next time.